The George Floyd trial begins today. Derek Chauvin is being charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter, and already thousands of people are protesting in the streets. The city is setting up barricades and police forces, apparently preparing for this moment for some time. And everybody expects, no matter the outcome, there will be widespread riots throughout this city, Minneapolis. The interesting thing about this city is that, well, they voted to defund their police. They panicked. They tried bringing the cops back. Now they're doing some kind of multi-million-dollar recruitment drive, desperate to get their cops back. After they voted to get rid of the cops, people started complaining all over the city because crime and homicides were skyrocketing, and now they're desperate. But what's going to happen when these people come out to riot and the police force in this city has been crippled? Man, if you think the riots last year were bad, I think we expect them to get very, very bad, probably substantially worse. I mean, you got to realize when all of this went down with George Floyd, you had nationwide outrage because this man lost his life. And there was certain narratives going around. And we'll get into all of this. Now you have to realize that when Derek Chauvin is found not guilty, and he very likely will be, and I'll explain why, they are going to be 10 times angry. Listen. The first riots were basically like, we demand these cops be arrested and charged. And they said, okay, and they did. But even after they did, people still rioted, burned down buildings, destroyed lives. What do you think's going to happen when the courts are like, not guilty, free to go? These people are going to erupt. So it's entirely possible that Chauvin is convicted for political reasons. It's hard to know exactly how things will play out. But based on the charges, second-degree murder and manslaughter, I believe publicly available information suggests he will not be found guilty. Now, if you're on the left for some reason watching my content, well, it's not me saying the dude didn't do anything wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying based on what's already been made publicly available, this guy's likely not going to get charged. What you need to understand about second-degree murder is that he had to have the intent to kill. For manslaughter, you need to prove that he did something, he was negligent that caused harm resulting in death. It's possible, in my opinion, that if this trial is played straight, right, like no politics involved, just here's the evidence, here's the jury, manslaughter is on the table. Second-degree murder is not. They overcharged him. Maybe third degree. Manslaughter, maybe. The problem? The defense released images from Minneapolis police training showing them using the knee that Chauvin did. Now, you could argue, yeah, but just because you're trained to do it doesn't mean you do it for 9 minutes. But that still creates doubt. You see, you don't have to prove that Chauvin did anything wrong. You don't have to prove him innocent. That's not how court works. What's going to happen is the defense is going to say you need only a reasonable doubt. And now here's where it gets really bad for the prosecutors. There was an autopsy report that said, well, actually, I want to make sure I read this because I don't want people claiming it was me. From Business Insider, May 30th, 2020. George Floyd autopsy shows no sign of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Attributes death to being restrained, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system. It is true that he had a lot in his system. I believe he had a lot of fentanyl. He also had, I believe, meth, among other drugs in his system. Now, I believe the examiner did not conclude the death was the result solely of fentanyl overdose. Tucker Carlson recently did a segment where he said that's the real reason he died. No, that's not what the autopsy, the examiner said. But when you go to a jury and you simply say, look at what was in his system as per the medical examiner, that's reasonable doubt. So you can expect? You can expect mass unrest. From ABC News, intimidation tactic. Advocates on edge amid stepped-up security for Derek Chauvin trial in George Floyd's death. They're apparently setting up big barricades. They say fortified fencing, barbed wire, concrete barricades have gone up around the courthouse and police stations in Minneapolis in preparation for the landmark murder trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. But what may seem like necessary preparations for unrest that could accompany the trial in a city still recovering from violence and destruction that erupted there last summer after Floyd's death, to others is a frustrating sign that government officials don't understand the source of tensions between police and community in the first place, aggressive police posture. Candace Montgomery, a local activist who helped organize protests over the killing of Floyd, said seeing taxpayer money allocated to ramping up security measures for a police department that she has supported defunding has been unsettling. She says, quote, as the people of Minneapolis and Minnesota are calling for justice and healing and care, state officials have been responding in some ways by basically preparing to go to war with folks. Interesting. She says, so I do think it's meant to be an intimidation tactic. Why are police setting up barricades? Thousands of protesters marched through Minneapolis to courthouse, where ex-cop Derek Chauvin's trial over the death of George Floyd is set to begin. They say Derek Chauvin's trial on charges of second-degree murder and manslaughter is slated to begin Monday. The white ex-cop is accused of killing George Floyd when he knelt on the black man's neck in an arrest in May. Minneapolis has been preparing for unrest for weeks, calling in up to 2,000 National Guard members. My friends, if your city is not preparing for this, they will regret it. When the George Floyd riots happened, the George Floyd riots swept across this country, okay? 19 people died directly as a result, and there was another, I believe, 12 to 14 who died peripherally, meaning like there are people who actually died in the riots and there are people who died as a result of the riots. Giving the direct breakdown is more difficult. Like an example of someone who died directly in the riots is like they found one body in the burnt rubble of a building versus somebody who got like hit by a car while the riots were going on, things like that. So a lot of people have died. The original number they gave during the riots was like 31, but they lowered it because they didn't want the peripheral, whatever. It was bad for the press, I guess, so they changed the number. Whatever you think is the appropriate number is up to you. The point is, it's going to sweep the country. And at a time when homicides are skyrocketing, I think I might have this pulled up here. Check it out. Homicides, you can see right here in the pandemic and during just after the George Floyd riots, you can see that in the beginning of last year, homicides skyrocketed substantially. So you can see, I don't really know how to describe it to those that are listening on the podcast, but let me just say it is a hockey stick on a graph showing the line shooting straight up. This is a report that says criminal homicides are deliberate and unlawful killings of another human being. As with all offenses examined here, other than drug offenses, there is a clear cyclical pattern in homicide rates over time, with rates rising during the warmer summer months and falling during the winter. That said, homicide rates in 2020 exceeded previous rates throughout the entire year, and there was a structural break in the city average in June, indicating a large, statistically significant increase in rates after adjusting for seasonality and the longer-term trend. After this break, homicide rates increased sharply through July, then declined through the end of the year, though not to levels observed in the year prior, meaning they are still higher than they have been. And this is what we can expect. Derek Chauvin will likely not be convicted, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but let me break it down for you. Here's an article from May 30th, 2020. And also stress, like I said, we already have skyrocketing homicide rates, crippled police forces, and protests have already started. And they haven't even issued a ruling. They're doing jury selection. It's literally just starting. And I'll tell you what, man, these protests they're scary. Because if the city fears the riots, then why would they choose justice? If Derek Chauvin is guilty, then so be it. If a jury trial finds him guilty, then so be it. But is it possible they just say, if we let this guy go, they'll burn down the country? So what do? That's the scary thing about politics. Let me read you the story from last year, and then I'll give you a breakdown of what's happening. They say George Floyd was non-responsive for nearly 3 minutes before Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin took his knee off his neck, according to a criminal complaint released on Friday. The complaint filed by the Hennepin County Attorney's Office also cited a preliminary autopsy report showing that there were no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Instead, the report said that it was the combined effect of Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. He died during an arrest, this we know. The complaint said that police are trained that this type of restraint with a subject in a prone position is inherently dangerous. That is fake news. This is the scary thing, my friends. The criminal complaint It's very strange to me, this whole thing. I think the riots really did result in this. So I'll say this to all the left-wing activists, congratulations. Rioting and burning down the city really did work. But they said restraining the subject in a prone position is inherently dangerous. Okay, maybe because Floyd was unresponsive for 3 minutes and he didn't take his knee off his neck, you can argue manslaughter. But what if I were to show you? Minneapolis Police Department trained officers to use the neck restraint that killed George Floyd. Here's what I've long said. This is from July 8th, 2020. The problem here is systemic. That's right. The police training, the system in place, they specifically say, they specifically teach the officers to do certain things. Now, for obvious reasons, I have to, I can't show the image of the knee on the neck, but I can show you this. In a tweet from Brandon Stahl, he says, a description of a proper neck restraint and how it looks in practice. Let me pull up this tweet and I can show you this actual image. This image is from actual Minneapolis police trainings. Okay, here it is. It says, okay, they are in handcuffs. Now what? As you can see, there's a man kneeling on a police officer's neck. And for YouTube, I guess maybe you want to demonetize it. Look, this is a police training. No one is actually being harmed in any capacity. Not that I think it ultimately matters. They say sudden cardiac arrest typically occurs immediately following a violent struggle. Place the subject in the recovery position to alleviate positional asphyxia. Once in handcuffs, get EMS on scene quickly to monitor and transport. Sign a transport hold on these individuals. Complete a CIC report. As you can see in the image, they show the officers doing exactly what Chauvin is accused of doing. Now, you may tell me that it's wrong. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't like seeing this, and it resulted in someone's death. I think it's really, really bad. But if Derek Chauvin was trained to do this, how do you argue manslaughter or murder? You can argue that his actions resulted in the death of George Floyd. That's true. I mean, the medical examiner says being restrained as well as intoxicants in his systems and underlying health effects. But if the police department said, we want you to do this, we got a serious problem. The way I explain it is we ask police officers to go out and do these things. We have a governmental system in place that tells the officers what they're supposed to do. Notably, in this training exercise video, seriously, YouTube's going to demonetize this, you can see them putting the knee on the neck. If Derek Chauvin was just doing as he was trained by the police, then the problem is the police department as a whole is at fault and not Chauvin as an individual. But I think many of these leftists don't see the difference between individual action and collective action. Many of them are collectivists, so they don't care. They say, lock up the cop. I'm not a fan. I think the cop as an individual should not be held to account because of what we as a community asked him to do. And think about what this really means in the long run. If these people who are collectivists, socialist, communist, not all, I'm not saying literally everyone on the left. I'm saying if the people who are socialists are saying that the collective must dictate, but you will be personally held responsible for what the collective dictates, that is a nightmarish world to live in. I got to tell you this. So you're a cop and they say, go out and arrest this guy because he committed a crime. And when you do, they arrest you instead. You'd be like, why would I do this? Why would someone want to be a member of the Minneapolis Police Department when they're basically threatening you that if you defend yourself, if you do as you are trained to do, you will go to jail for it? You have to be the stupidest people in the world to work for the Minneapolis Police Department right now. No joke. Each and every one, and maybe the left will really love this. If you work for the Minneapolis Police Department, you are not a smart person. They will sacrifice you to stop the outrage as they are doing. And many people might say, oh, but he's not going to get convicted. Oh, yeah. You want to spend nearly a year in jail in holding in an orange jumpsuit when you were doing as you were trained to do? I don't like what Chauvin did. I don't like what any of these cops do. The problem is the police department, and we should reform the system. But think about how stupid you'd have to be to work for the Minneapolis Police Department right now. A lot of these cops quit. A lot of cops across the country were quitting, and there was huge exodus. And what ended up happening was they started hiring what many cops were. I got messages from cops saying these are scabs, right? It's basically a revolt against the system for many of these officers. They're quitting, saying, I don't want to be arrested because I was told by my boss to do something. Think about it. I suppose you could say that just following orders is no excuse. If that were, and that's true, and I wholeheartedly believe that, if someone tells you to do something and you know it's wrong and you do it, you're responsible. The difference here is that Derek Chauvin didn't grab George Floyd because someone told him to and then shoot him. He held him on the ground and did as he was trained to restrain him, which is described as putting the person in a position to alleviate positional asphyxia. So this document says. Maybe it doesn't. But according to this insider report, no signs of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Could it be that what he did with the knee on the neck was meant to hold someone down without compressing their chest? Well, the autopsy report says there was no asphyxiation. So now you have an instance where I don't believe Chauvin wanted to kill anybody. I don't think he wanted to hurt the guy. I just think for the most part, most of these cops don't care. They do as they're trained. They'll hold someone down. There was no intent to kill, so maybe manslaughter. But in the end, I think each and every one of these cops would probably be wise not to work for these departments. I gotta be honest. I don't know why any of these cops want to work for any of these departments. I know there's a lot of cops that watch the show. Y'all are brave. I'll put it that way, for a lot of reasons. For a lot of reasons, y'all are brave. I've seen the videos of people jumping out of their car and shooting these cops. These are scary things. A video went viral recently where a woman apparently asked a couple cops to escort her to her property because there was a dude who had a gun and he was stalking and threatening her, like an ex or some sort. And the cops are just standing there do you know where he is? Do you know where he has the gun? And the dude just barges in and starts shooting like crazy. A lot of these, and that's why a lot of these cops are often on edge. And that's why I think a couple things when it comes to police. For a society to function, police need to be able to make arrests. That also means you'll end up with some cops who are bad cops who just arrest you, and it's annoying. We need police reform. Cops should not do that. It also means, however, if a cop is making a reasonable is conducting a reasonable investigation and detains you, chill out. I look, I understand these people who scream their rights, and I'm like, I get it. You're allowed to do it, so by all means, go ahead. I just think it's silly. When I've been stopped by the cops, you keep your mouth shut. You be polite, you keep your mouth shut, and you comply. And some people are like, it's not fair that I have to spend a night in jail because this cop was wrong. And it's like, yeah, that happens. It does suck. I've had a couple instances where I was wrongfully arrested and spent a night, was overnight in jail. And then I ended up winning instantly in court. But if a cop comes to arrest you and you fight with them, well, now you're not going to win in court. They're going to say you resisted, you fought, you assaulted an officer, and you're going to get all that stuff. Cop walks up to me, grabs my arms, puts them behind my back, and I just didn't say anything. Put me in the squad car, and I said, there we go. That's it. You have the right to remain silent. You would be smart to use it because they will use what you say against you. And then the biggest problem always is when people talk. When they talk and they think they can talk their way out of this. What you need to understand is these cops are doing a job they've been asked to do. And sometimes they do stupid things that I really don't like. Sometimes they do illegal criminal things. You still don't win when you fight with them. But oftentimes you'll have these dudes who will try and talk their way out of an arrest when the cop doesn't know or care. You're arrested. It's done. Now, I will tell you this. When I got arrested in D.C. during these riots, I did ask for the supervisor and I held up my press card. That did get me released. But there's a big difference between a riot where they're arresting everybody and you're standing with a group of journalists holding press cards and they don't want to actually arrest journalists, and a cop investigating, say, a robbery, a crime, a counterfeit bill, and they try to arrest or detain you and you fight and scream and spit and yowl, and then they get you for resisting. So look, I'm not a fan of the state oppressing and suppressing people's rights. I'm not a fan of wrongful arrests or arbitrary arrests, but I am a fan of tact and strategy. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't know how to deal with this, and I don't blame them for it. But let me get to the main point here. So we have, according to Cairo 7, they say, what's going to happen? They say you can be charged with second-degree murder up to 40 years. What do they say? A person can be charged if the death is caused without intent, while intentionally inflicting or attempting to inflict bodily harm upon the victim, when the perpetrator is restrained under an order of protection. Okay, what Chauvin was doing, as you saw in those training documents, does not seem like he was trying to intentionally harm the man. As for manslaughter, it gets interesting. They say you can get convicted of manslaughter in second degree. A person who causes the death of another by any of the following means is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree. and may be sentenced to imprisonment of not more than 10 years or to payment of a fine not more than $20,000 or both. They say, by the person's culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death of great bodily harm to another. Right there. They'll argue he may have been trained to use his knee, but for 9 minutes, when Floyd became unresponsive and he just stayed there with his knee on his neck, the defense will likely say simply being unresponsive does not mean the person was hurt or dead. In fact, based on the training that the officer had, this was the safer position to hold him in, and it actually was not creating a risk. They can say that this was when you don't want to rest on someone's chest, because then you end up with like an Eric Garner situation where he says, I can't breathe. And they're like, shut up. You can talk. You can breathe. You can't. You can exhale, but you can't inhale. So talking is possible, but you can't inhale. So they put their knee on the neck as they're trained to do. Is it a bad policy? Seems like it may be a bad policy. But I'll tell you what else, though. When they start banning these things, the only thing that these cops can do, if they're not allowed to put someone in a chokehold, which can subdue someone while keeping them alive, they can't pin them to the ground. If their only options are tase and shoot, then the only things they will do are tase and shoot. And it's likely to result in more lethal force. So I bring this up to say, here's what may happen. Chauvin may be convicted on manslaughter. He will likely not be convicted of second-degree murder. That sounds insane. If it's political, they might just give him second degree. Yeah. If it's not, I'll say this. If it's political, they might just say, not guilty. They might say guilt in second degree and guilty of manslaughter. If it's political in the other way, in favor of the cops, which also happens, he'll be found not guilty of all charges. If it is a fair and actual trial, there will be a legitimate argument for manslaughter. Legitimate argument. However, if Chauvin is not convicted of second-degree murder in any of these scenarios, there will be mass riots, period. They can get him for 10 years. They can say, you are found guilty of manslaughter, 10 years. 10 years in prison. And they will still riot unless murder is if he's found guilty of murder. So I hope you're ready. I think it's going to get wild. Well, we'll see how long it takes. Who knows? This is going to be for months probably, and we'll see how this plays out. But people are going to be following this trial very closely, and I will as well. And I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.